they called me back and said, we're going to Central Florida Regional in Sanford. So I swing a U-turn, get right back on I-4, and thank God there were no troopers between Deltona and the hospital in Sanford, because I don't even want to know how fast I was going, but I was on a mission. I had to get to the hospital. So I get to the hospital thinking she's going to be there. She's not there. So I go run into the emergency room. I said, did they bring a pregnant lady in here that's having seizures? And then all these women look at me like, who's this guy? So I actually beat the ambulance to the hospital. And so I kind of prepped them. I said, my wife is pregnant. She's having seizures. They're bringing her from Deltona. So they started kind of preparing. They're like, okay, well, let's start the check-in process. I'm like, okay, here's her name, social security number. Well, by that time, the ambulance pulled up. So, better? Sorry. The ambulance pulled up. So I went outside, and the two EMTs, they hop out, they open the doors of the ambulance, they're pulling the stretcher out, and it's like a scene out of a movie or a TV show. It was just like a blur. I could only get close enough to Charlotte to grab her hand. I couldn't even speak. I had no words. I wanted to tell her I loved her. I wanted to tell her it was going to be okay. I was like, there were no words. But I squeezed her hand, and when I grabbed onto her hand, it was so swollen. It was about like that. And so they rush her in to the emergency room. So I go back in, and they sit me down in the emergency room behind one of these curtains on the little bed, and I'm just being bombarded by doctors, nurses, wanting to know information. I had no idea how, I went to all of Charlotte's doctor's visits with her. And, my work was kind enough that I could take off early, attend doctor's visits. If I hadn't gone to those doctor visits, I wouldn't have been able to tell her, this is her weight, this is her height, this is her medication, this was, the anesthesiologist comes in. I need to know, how much does she weigh? How old is she? What's her birth date? They needed her social security number, all this information, and I just had all these answers. And then, the OB doctor came in that was on call, and he said, this is a very serious situation, and the only way that we can get your wife to stop seizing is to deliver the baby. He's like, but I have to tell you, this is an extremely risky situation. That, he said, babies are viable. She was 32 and a half weeks along with the pregnancy out of 40. But they don't know if the baby's going to survive, or if the baby is even still alive. They don't know if Charlotte's going to survive. And I looked at the OB doctor and I said, why are you talking to me? Go do your thing. Go. Don't talk to me, do it. Whatever you have to do, do it. And so I looked up some statistics, because they told me, they're like, if the baby survives, there's a very good chance he's going to be airlifted down to Orlando, to Arnold Palmer. Obviously, if Charlotte survives, she's going to be in intensive care. I didn't know what I was going to be doing. The only thing I could do was go into the waiting room. They took me up to the second floor, big waiting room, probably about half the size of this room. And I go into the furthest corner of the waiting room, away from, there was a few other people that were in there. This was after I reached out and I called my mom. I called Charlotte's mom, I left messages. And I sat down in that waiting room, and I was angry. I was angry at the people that were in the waiting room, because they were kind of joking, having a conversation. I'm like, I wanted to just yell out, don't you guys realize what I'm going through right now? Why are you laughing? But all I could do was sit down, put my head down, and just pray, and give it to God. I had no control. I've always wanted to be in control. I gotta provide. I have to be aware of the situation. And now here I am, sitting in a waiting room. My wife might be dead. I don't know. My child might be dead. I'm like, what happened? This started out, I went to work this morning as a normal day. Why? Why, God? And God gave me a little snippet of a sermon that our pastor had given where he was talking about being a Christian and being on your walk with God is kind of like being a little kid in a car seat. The little kid can look out the window and see where you're going, but Dad's driving the car. God's driving the car. Sometimes we're just along for the ride. And maybe if we make the wrong choices, the car will make turns this way, that way, but ultimately he's going to take us to where he wants us to go. So I said, you know what, God, you're driving the car. And it was about 7:05, I think, p.m. Nate was born. They didn't come and get me till about 7:30, almost 7:40. The nurse comes in, she calls Mr. Jacobs. I jump up, I run over there, and she said, baby was delivered, he's stable, he pinked right up, 4 pounds, 5 ounces. Charlotte's on a respirator, but she's in stable condition. So this went about as good as it possibly could. So when I look back at that, and I found an article online, it said about 5% of pregnancies develop preeclampsia. Preeclampsia is when your blood pressure starts going up, swelling. Charlotte started to have some signs and symptoms of that, and she was supposed to go later that week for an appointment to see if it was advancing. And we didn't even get that far. She went full-on eclamptic seizures. Only 1 out of every 200 pregnancies that have preeclampsia get to the point of having the full seizures. This excerpt from an article about a lady's story, I'm just going to read what I have here. It says, the first ambulance that arrived came from a private hospital 11 minutes after the 911 call. And witnesses said the crew didn't have the necessary equipment to care for Renix, a mother of 1 who was 6 months pregnant. Renix was transported to Long Island College Hospital where she was pronounced dead. The fetus also perished. So, EMTs arriving 11 minutes after a 911 call when a pregnant lady goes into a seizure, and she perished. Charlotte very well could have started having seizures shortly after noon when she tried to call me. How she's still here is God. That's the only answer that I can possibly give, is God sustained her.
Amen.
Hallelujah.
So, a lot of miraculous things happened. They took me up to the nursery to see Nate. By the time I started walking up to the nursery, here's everyone from our church walking in, people from the worship team. So many, Phil, John, there's a lot of people that were our close family, because we didn't have a close family immediately by, because Charlotte's mom and dad had moved from Orange City back up. They went up to Coleman, Alabama, and they were retired up there. So when we moved down here, they took off. So, just having that presence around me was exactly what I needed, because otherwise I'm on this journey by myself. My partner in crime is up in intensive care, and everyone's showing up. My neighbor Amy showed up, and she actually was able to drive back to my house, get my digital camera, and drive back to the hospital. So I actually got some pictures of Nate before they transported him, because he was stable enough, even though they don't deliver high-risk pregnancies in Sanford. They actually don't deliver there anymore at all. But at the time, they didn't do high risk.
At all.
But they, God had those doctors and nurses in the right spot, gave them the knowledge to get God's work done. And he was stable. It was an emotional roller coaster. Going from just every thought that the enemy could put in my head, that I was no longer going to have a wife, I wasn't going to get my son, to seeing that God carried her through all of that. the stress level that Nate went through, low oxygen levels through the seizures, everything, just premature birth, breathing issues, he was on a ventilator. Charlotte was sedated, she was in ICU. I had no idea if she was gonna have brain damage. They were prepping me for all of these things. You know, they only tell you little bits and pieces of information. I wanted the whole scoop. I'm like, just lay it on me. I need to know what I'm dealing with here. They didn't really know. They had her in an induced coma on a respirator. Obviously with seizures, there's risk of brain damage, all kinds of things. Family started to show up. I went that night, drove down to Florida South in Orlando, where they transported Nate via ambulance. So I went down there to see him. And that's a crazy situation if you've ever been to a neonatal intensive care unit. I don't like watching these hospital shows with the blood and the this and the that. You know, I'm like, I don't know what all this is about. They're like, oh yeah, you know, scrub up over there, scrub to your elbows, put on the gown, put on a mask. And I go into this room and there's all these little babies that are born with, you know, addiction, premature, tiny babies. And Nate, I mean, he fit pretty much in the palm of my hand. He was 4 pounds, 5 ounces. And seeing the parents in that room, you know, and I couldn't touch him. He was in the incubator. All I could do was look. I really couldn't do anything. I go back to Central Florida Regional in Sanford, and by this point, I don't even know how many hours I had been awake, but this is when I started drinking coffee, because they brought, you know, breakfast, and I said, I hate coffee. So they brought me a tray. I put every little sugar packet and creamer that they put on the tray in there, mixed it up. I'm like, I need to keep going. I have to keep going and do this. Once Charlotte's brother that lives on Lakeland, sister-in-law, they came up to be with Charlotte. They sent me home to rest. And this started a cycle where I would go from Sanford to Orlando, back to Sanford. Every night, I would tell Charlotte that she had the baby. She's still out of it. She doesn't even know that she delivered the baby. She has no idea. The security guard at the hospital and I became kind of good buddies because he was always working night shift. I had to come in through the ER in order to get into the hospital late at night. So he would ask every night, you know, how's the baby doing? You know, the baby's doing good. But Nate had a heart problem that they told me about. It was called PDA, patent ductus arteriosus. So basically one of the valves in his heart that when the baby's born is supposed to close so that it takes oxygen out of the blood, didn't close right. So, okay, as if this isn't enough, God, now he needs possibly heart surgery as a tiny baby. Thankfully, there was an alternative that they tried first, which is a really strong dose of, I guess, antibiotics or some medication to get his heart valve to close. And in order to give him that medication, his platelet level needed to be brought up. So he had to get a unit of platelets. And this immediately, you know, the enemy he dives right in. He's like, oh, there's a foothold. So it goes right back to everything you hear about, you know, these horrible situations where people receive blood transfusions and they end up with, you know, HIV. And I'm like, I don't have control. Now he's getting somebody else's, you know, platelets. God's in control. So Charlotte was released from the hospital after 8 days. I told her, I don't know how many times I had to tell her what happened before she was conscious. When she did, they kind of took out the respirator. She wasn't able to speak right, which they were, you know, sensors all over her head, doing all these scans, brain damage scans, all this stuff. because of all the seizures. Here, it turns out she had bit her tongue up so much during the seizures that it was so swollen, that's why she couldn't talk, right? But it's amazing how God can sustain us and carry us through things when just everything is stacking up against what logic and science and everything tells you. You know, the statistics are just crazy. Work was very flexible with me. Somehow, I don't know how, I had to get back to work. I had like 2 weeks I could take off. I had people at work that were trying to give me their vacation time. And the vice president that I work for, he actually was considering allowing this, which is just kind of unheard of. But I started to go back to work, and I would go from work, home, pick up Charlotte, we'd drive to Orlando to see Nate, we'd leave Orlando at midnight, 1 in the morning, drive home, I'd sleep for a couple hours, get up, go back to work, and do the same thing over and over and over again. I mean, leaving your child in the hospital is just something that is not easy to do. It's not natural, you know. She didn't even get to see Nate for almost 8 days. That connection just, you know, and I mean, Charlotte struggled a lot. Just that motherly connection with Nate. Not being able to hold him, not being able to see him, not being able to touch him for that long while she recovered enough to be released herself from the hospital. That went on for a number of weeks. We were very hopeful that, you know, Nate would strengthen up, he'd be able to come home. He did end up needing another blood transfusion. Again, those same thoughts. So this time, they told me, you might be able to be his donor. I'm like, well, what does that mean? Because I've never donated blood before. Oh, well, as long as you're the same blood type as him. So as it turns out, I'm an O positive, and Nate's an O positive. So, and Charlotte's an O positive too. I had no idea what my blood type was. So I think God's like, would you stop worrying about it? Okay, I'll let you give your blood. So I was able to go and donate blood. They tag it. So Nate's got, if he ends up as tall as me, maybe it's because, he's got a pound of my blood in him. I don't know. But just different situations like that, God put so many different people in our path. One of the girls that Charlotte went to school with in high school is a nurse at the neonatal ward at the hospital. So we ran into her. So she would check in on Nate. He had his own little room, he went through being jaundiced, he went through just all kinds of things. They called him a wimpy white boy. Just Caucasian babies, they struggle with the lung development, especially preemies. Finally, after 8 weeks, we were able to bring him home. So great, this is awesome, we can bring our baby home. Except he needs to be on oxygen still, and he needs to be on an apnea monitor, and you have to learn how to do infant Heimlich maneuver, you need to learn how to do infant CPR. We had to stay at the hospital overnight, get certified in all this stuff, and we're going, shouldn't they just be learning how to change a diaper? Is that enough? No. So much more. But some of the nurses that were there would show up and they'd be singing hymns in the nursery. Wonderful. I mean, these women were just amazing taking care of these babies. And it was just a blessing to see God's presence in so many spots along the way. Even though at times it's very hard to stay focused and be at peace that he's in control when your flesh, you want to bring your child home. You're angry because this didn't go the way everyone, why can these teenagers that don't even want to have babies have perfectly healthy babies and they bounce right back? But God carried us through all that. We had tons of follow-up visits. pediatrician, normal visits, pulmonologist once a month. He was at risk for BPD, which is a very serious infection of the lungs. He had to get shots for that. All these doctors' bills just start rolling in. And keep in mind, we still hadn't paid DeLand Hospital yet. Now we have Sanford, Charlotte's there for a week, and then we have Florida Hospital in Orlando, Nate's there for 8 weeks. The hospital wouldn't recognize the culmination of all that. They said, well, you make too much money, so you don't qualify for any assistance. And because you have insurance, we can't write it off. If you didn't have insurance, then you would qualify for these other, it was craziness. So, God did take care of one of the bills. Some of these office managers at these doctors' appointments, they tell me, hey, if you can't pay at least $50 a month, we're gonna send you to collections anyway, so don't send anything. She's like, I hate to tell you that, but so everything, it was just going to collections. And there was one of the bills, they kept calling me, and I finally called them back. I'm like, listen, I can't give any more. I don't have any money to give you. I've got 20 people that all want $50 a month. What do you want me to do? And this old lady, she said, sir, I have your file. It's still here on my desk. I was supposed to turn it into collections, but I just didn't feel right. And she said, let me talk to the doctor. And she went and talked to the doctor, and this is one of the doctors that we actually spoke to. He was there. It's very rare when you're popping in and out that the doctor's actually in the room. You receive everything through the nurses, but the doctor actually remembered talking to us, and he just wiped out. $3,500 gone, balance zero. There's still so much. We ran up all of our credit cards with gas money back and forth to the hospital, paying the parking in the parking garage, just put us into a financial spiral to the point where we almost lost our house. And if it wasn't for one of, I don't know if it's a realtor or collection agency, somebody was trying to find me and called my parents up in Illinois. So I get a call from my dad. So what's going on? Because I'm too proud to ask for help. And thankfully my parents were able to help us out and bail us out of our credit card debt at the time. Which to me, I struggle with that. I'm like, no, this is my debt, this is my problem, I have to do this. I'm strong, I'm gonna make it happen. And I really think God knew, hey, I'm gonna have to go, I'm gonna have to do the end around over here and come from the other side to get this to work out. We were literally 3 months behind. We could make a partial month over, it was insane. So we go through all of this, and God gives us provision when we need it. To the point where we were 3 months behind on our mortgage, and I don't know what's going to happen. And that was when the economy was doing pretty good, and all of a sudden they started giving out profit sharing bonuses at work. And the amounts of those bonuses that I would get would be pretty much right about the same amount that I needed to survive another month. And God's timing is not our timing. And it is not easy to trust that He's going to provide that, especially when you can't see it. But there's different things that they had never given profit sharing bonuses before. This was, in my mind, I don't know what's going on. But boom, something new. So despite all that, we still felt comfortable expanding our family. Everybody. It's like, are you crazy? Why would you go through another pregnancy? What if this happens again? And we're like, well, God's got it in control. And to people that aren't believers especially, they're like, what do you think? Are you nuts? You're crazy. So again, we were at peace with it. We're like, well, we know what to look for now. We're good. So we started, when Nate was 2 years old, we were going to try to have another child. When Nate was 3 years old, Charlotte finds him behind the curtains by our backsliding door, praying for Jesus to put 2 babies in mommy's belly. So, Billy, when you mentioned last week, and I told you this last week, when you mentioned how important it is to pray with our kids and how God honors the prayers of kids, that, Amelia and Elissa, I firmly believe they are an answer to Nate's prayers. Sometimes I ask Nate, why? These children are more than I can handle. So Nate was 2, so that was about 2007, 2008, somewhere in there. By 2011, we had pretty much given up on trying. It wasn't happening. And we said, you know what, maybe we're supposed to adopt. Adoption is so expensive. So we made the decision, we're like, well, we're going to just start setting aside a little bit of money when we can to save up to adopt. And October 27th, 2011, Charlotte finds out she's pregnant. So, praise God, exactly. We go straight to the high-risk doctor at this point. We're like, okay, not messing around, no normal doctor, we're going straight to the high-risk place that was right across the street from the hospital where Nate was treated for 8 weeks. They do an ultrasound. Charlotte was 9 weeks along, little kidney bean in there, heartbeat, great. One little kidney bean, one heartbeat was all they saw. So we knew she was going to be high risk. The doctors group, they told us, once you get so far along, about halfway through, you're going to go to the high risk pregnancy doctor in Orlando. The goal was to get her to be 37 weeks. That was after. We go to the high-risk doctor for trying to find out, okay, we're going to have a boy or a girl. Now, I knew we had a name picked out. We had Amelia Joy picked out as a girl's name. We did not have a boy's name picked out. And my family all knew this. So when we went to the doctor, to find out, she puts the little scanner thing on Charlotte's belly, and she takes it off right away. And she goes, you had an ultrasound, right? I'm like, yeah. She's like, where'd you have that done? I'm like, well, what's that mean? I said, over at Lockhaven. She's like, really? Which doctor did it? What's wrong? She's like, look at this. And she puts the thing in, clear as day. Boom, 2 babies. So she wanted to give a hard time to the doctor that didn't pick up on that, weeks earlier. So now, as if she wasn't high risk enough, being over 35, because of her age, because of her previous history, now twins. So 37 weeks was the goal. She started having blood pressure issues at about 33 weeks, which was about, I've got in my notes here, the 8th of May, 2012. So they said, come back every week. The doctor told us, go to Walgreens, once a day, every other day, and check your blood pressure. I'm like, no. We're buying a blood pressure cuff, you're going to check your blood pressure like every other hour. Right. We ain't messing around. We need to know, when we gotta go. So, on the 9th, Charlotte's blood pressure was too high. They told us, if the bottom number is over 90, go to the hospital. So the next day, bottom number was 92. Boom. We go down to the hospital. They check her out. They monitor her. She's laying down. Her blood pressure comes down. They send us home. Charlotte's mom was up in Alabama at the time. She flew in that night because she knew she was going to have to be there for Nate, take Nate back and forth to school, everything like that. Nate stayed at a friend's house that night because we were in the hospital. They monitored Charlotte. They sent her back home. Her blood pressure was on the brink of being high for the next couple of days. On the 13th of May, which happened to be Mother's Day of that year, her blood pressure was high again. Go back to the hospital. They admitted her this time for observation. We met with the doctor. They gave Charlotte the first round of steroids to speed up lung development. We saw Dr. Humphrey in the morning. On the 14th of May, Charlotte got the second round of steroids because we knew, okay, she's not getting to 37 weeks. Kind of had planned that she would have the baby the following day, which was the 15th of May, 2012. So they kind of start running through the game plan. Okay, we talked to anesthesiologist, great team of doctors, felt very, very comfortable with everything until they came to a point where they said, well, we're going to get Charlotte a dose of magnesium to prevent her from going into seizures because she had that in the past. And that's going to weaken her a lot. Magnesium, I guess, just depletes your energy, so she's not going to be able to see the babies the first day. And I'm like, no, we don't want the magnesium. So now here we are. I'm like, okay, what chance do I stand telling these doctors that I don't want them to do what they know is the best thing? So we prayed that somehow Charlotte would be able to see the girls, because we went through this with Nate. She needed to see her babies. And I go home, get a shower, get some clothes. I'm getting ready to leave Deltona to go to the hospital, and I got this wave of nervousness that came over me. And so I flipped the radio on, and what song's playing on the radio? But You Are God Alone. Now that song is one of two songs that God gave us as we were driving back and forth every night to the hospital to see Nate. He's my son, was really popular, I guess. God gave us that song when Nate was in the hospital. So I flipped the radio on and I hear You Are God Alone on the way back to the hospital. And it just reminded me, like, Larry, what are you nervous for? I've got this. Just go along for the ride.
There you go.
So they schedule a C-section. I go to the restroom. I come back into the room. And all of a sudden, there's all these doctors crowded around Charlotte's bed. She is white as a ghost, just pale. Her vitals are dropping because they put her on that magnesium drip. So the doctor runs in, and she literally, they start ripping cords out of the wall. They're like, we need to get her to the delivery room. Stop the magnesium. So, literally, I was almost jogging behind the stretcher down the hall of the hospital. I'm like, where's the film crew? Because I feel like I'm on an episode of one of these shows, this happens every time. What's the problem? So we get to the emergency room. Just by stopping that magnesium, her vitals started to come back. She started to get color. So they just paused on the emergency delivery and went ahead of the scheduled time. Amelia was born at 2:18. Elissa came right after at 2:19. Charlotte was able to, they were able to wheel her through the nursery. She was able to see the girls before she went to recovery. God worked it all out. He honors the desires of our hearts. And Charlotte was released on the 18th. The girls were in the hospital for another 2 weeks, which is kind of interesting. The doctors that had no idea what our previous experience was, they would start to try to sugarcoat and kind of explain, ease us into this. I'm like, oh yeah, so they're on a CPAP, and she's like, yeah. We went through this with my son. He was a 7.5-week preemie. Not only that, there were some of the nurses that took care of Nate that also took care of the girls. One of the girls actually stayed in the exact same room that Nate was in. Miss Pam. I'll never forget Miss Pam.